Why didn't the Soviet Union just annex Finland? It seems like a strange question, but when you look at a map of Cold War Europe, Finland really sticks out. It's right there, sharing a massive border with the Soviet Union. Yet it wasn't a part of the Warsaw Pact. It wasn't a Soviet satellite state like Poland or Hungary. So, what happened? Why did the USSR, a superpower known for its expansionist policies, leave Finland alone? The answer is a fascinating mix of brutal warfare, clever diplomacy, and geopolitical chess that spanned decades. To understand this, we have to go back to 1917. As the Russian Empire crumbled during the revolution, Finland seized its chance and declared independence, but freedom wasn't simple. A bitter civil war erupted almost immediately, pitting the Reds, supported by Soviet Russia, against the Whites, who were anti-socialist and backed by Germany. The Whites won, and the new Republic of Finland was born. However, the shadow of its giant eastern neighbor was always present. Fast forward to the 1930s, Joseph Stalin is in power, and he's obsessed with restoring the old borders of the Russian Empire and creating a buffer zone to protect the Soviet Union from potential Western aggression. He looks at Finland and sees a problem. The Finnish border was just a stone's throw away from Leningrad, modern-day St. Petersburg, one of the USSR's most important industrial and cultural centers. Stalin believed this made Leningrad vulnerable to an attack launched from Finnish territory. So, in 1939, just as World War II was kicking off, Stalin made his move. He demanded that Finland cede strategic territories, including parts of the Karelian Isthmus, and allow the Soviets to build a naval base on Finnish land. He offered some less valuable land in exchange, but the Finns saw this for what it was, a violation of their sovereignty. They refused. Stalin, reportedly saying, "Since the civilians have failed to make them see reason, the military will now have its say," ordered the Red Army to invade. This was the beginning of the legendary Winter War. On paper, it was a total mismatch. The Soviet Union had millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and a massive air force. Finland was a small nation with a tiny, poorly equipped army. The world expected Finland to be crushed within days. But what happened next shocked everyone. The Finnish soldiers, fighting on home turf in the brutal Arctic winter, put up a heroic and incredibly effective resistance. They were masters of winter warfare, using skis to move silently through the forests, camouflaging themselves in white, and employing Marty tactics, which involved encircling and destroying isolated pockets of the much larger Red Army. They used Molotov cocktails, named in honor of the Soviet foreign minister, to devastating effect against Soviet tanks. The Red Army, poorly led after Stalin's purges of the officer corps and unprepared for the extreme cold, suffered staggering casualties. The spirit of the Winter War captured the world's imagination. Finland was the brave little David fighting the monstrous Soviet Goliath. However, heroism alone couldn't win the war. The sheer numbers of the Soviet Union were overwhelming. After more than 3 months of brutal fighting, Finland was forced to sue for peace. The Moscow Peace Treaty of 1940 was harsh. Finland lost about 9% of its territory, including its second-largest city, Viipuri, and a significant portion of its industrial capacity. Over 400,000 people, more than a tenth of the population, had to be evacuated from the ceded areas. For the Finns, this was a national trauma. They had preserved their independence, but at a terrible cost, and they wanted their land back. This desire for revenge and reclamation of lost territory would lead them into their next major conflict, the Continuation War. When Nazi Germany launched its surprise invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, Operation Barbarossa, Finland saw an opportunity. They joined Germany as a co-belligerent, not an official Axis member, but an ally of convenience. The Finnish goal was clear: to reconquer the lands they lost in the Winter War. Initially, the Continuation War went well for them. With German support, the Finnish army pushed the Red Army back and reclaimed the Karelian Isthmus. They even advanced beyond their old 1939 border, occupying parts of Soviet Karelia, but the tide of World War II was turning. After the disastrous German defeat at Stalingrad, the Soviet Union began its relentless push westward. By the summer of 1944, the Red Army was back on Finland's doorstep, and this time it was a far more formidable and experienced fighting force. The Soviets launched a massive offensive on the Karelian Isthmus. The Finnish lines, stretched thin and exhausted after years of war, began to crumble. This is the crucial moment. The Soviets were breaking through. They had the military might to push all the way to Helsinki and occupy the entire country. So why didn't they? There are a few key reasons. First, the cost. Even though the Finns were retreating, they were still inflicting heavy casualties. The Red Army leadership realized that a full-scale conquest of Finland would be a long, bloody affair, requiring a huge commitment of troops and resources. They had bigger fish to fry. Their primary objective was to race towards Berlin and defeat Nazi Germany. Tying up hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the forests of Finland wasn't strategically smart. The second reason was geopolitical. Stalin was worried about Sweden. If the Soviet Union completely crushed and annexed Finland, it would have sent shockwaves through Scandinavia. Neutral Sweden would have been terrified. and it was highly likely they would have abandoned their neutrality and aligned themselves with the Western allies, potentially even joining the future NATO alliance. This would have given the West a major strategic foothold right on the Soviet Union's northern flank. For Stalin, a neutral, compliant Finland was a much better outcome than a hostile NATO-aligned Sweden. So, instead of a full conquest, the Soviets accepted a Finnish plea for an armistice. The Moscow Armistice of 1944 was even more punitive than the treaty after the Winter War. Finland had to confirm the 1940 territorial losses, cede the Petsamo region, which gave the USSR a border with Norway, and leased the Porkala Peninsula near Helsinki to the Soviets for a naval base. They also had to pay massive war reparations, expel all German troops from their territory, which led to another brief conflict known as the Lapland War, and officially recognized their defeat. The post-war years were a period of immense uncertainty for Finland. The Soviets had their military base just outside the capital. The country was economically crippled, and the Communist Party of Finland, backed by Moscow, was gaining political influence. Many in the West expected Finland to be the next country to fall behind the Iron Curtain. It looked like the salami tactics of a slow takeover were in full swing. But Finland managed to walk a tightrope. This delicate balancing act became known as Finlandization. The term was often used pejoratively in the West to describe a country's policy of kowtowing to a more powerful neighbor, and to an extent, that's what it was. In 1948, Finland and the Soviet Union signed the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance. This treaty formed the bedrock of their relationship for the rest of the Cold War. Under the treaty, Finland committed to resisting any attack on the Soviet Union through Finnish territory by Germany or its allies. Crucially, it also meant that in its foreign policy, Finland could not officially oppose the Soviet Union. It maintained a strict policy of neutrality, staying out of NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Internally, Finland remained a Western-style democracy with a free market economy, but externally it was always looking over its shoulder at Moscow. Finnish politicians practiced a form of self-censorship, avoiding any actions or statements that could provoke their powerful neighbor. This policy, masterfully navigated by long-serving President Urho Kekkonen, allowed Finland to survive the Cold War with its independence and democratic institutions intact. For the Soviet Union, this arrangement was actually quite beneficial. They had secured their northern flank without the cost and international headache of a full occupation. They had a friendly, non-aligned buffer state, and they had a useful, acceptable, independent voice in world affairs, which could sometimes act as a bridge between East and West. Annexing Finland was simply unnecessary. They had achieved their strategic goals: a secure border and a compliant neighbor, without having to take on the burden of ruling a fiercely independent and resentful population. So, the reason the Soviet Union did annex Finland comes down to this. The Finns fought so hard that they made the cost of conquest unacceptably high. Then, through clever and pragmatic diplomacy, they made the benefits of their independence greater for the Soviets than the benefits of annexation. It was a story of incredible resilience, a testament to the fact that even for a superpower, there are limits to power, and sometimes, the smartest move is to leave a stubborn neighbor alone. It's a unique chapter in the history of the 20th century. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history interesting, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into complex historical questions. Let me know in the comments what you think, and we'll see you in the next one.